All right, I've got 6 o'clock. We're ready to get started here. Welcome to the Fayetteville Area MPO Congestion Management Process Virtual Public Meeting number 2. This is the second of 2 public meetings for the project. My name is Zach Bug. I'm a senior engineer with Kittleson, and I'd like to start things off by handing it over to Mr. Hank Graham, who is the Executive Director of FAMPO.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Zach stated, I am the Executive Director of the Fayetteville Area MPO, and we contracted with Kittleson last year to conduct the completion of our congestion management plan process. And this process we've been working on for the entire year, of course, and we are coming to the close of our efforts, and I'm looking forward to seeing a list of projects, potential projects and improvements from this process that we will be able to include and incorporate into our upcoming Metropolitan Transportation Plan process, and then segue all of those projects and recommendations into our the state transportation improvement program in Raleigh. Hopefully we'll be able to get some of these projects funded, and with participation, continued participation from residents and folks that live in the Fayetteville area, we will be able to elevate the projects that are in most need in our area so that we can get them funded and constructed. So having said that, Zach, please take it away.
Thank you, Hank. All right, so just to get things started, after that introduction, wanted to just kind of do a quick overview. I'll also mention that Kittleson is leading the effort, but we're supported by RS&H and Creative Visibility on our team. Just to go through a quick agenda here, I want to recap the activities since, as Hank mentioned, this project got started last year. Back in around May of 2021. We can go back through what the project has done, so forth, and then recap the first public meeting that was held last September, and it's been about 6 months since we've connected. Then we'll talk through the most recent analysis that the project has performed, and then getting into the project recommendations. And this is where we really want to hear from you all. Thinking about what projects are being recommended, what locations are being ranked the highest for improvement, and then this toolbox piece. So these are really the two critical pieces that we're looking for input from you on. So I'll throw up the project objectives. I won't read through these in detail, but as Hank said, the underlying goal of the congestion management process is to identify projects. It can be short-term, medium-term, long-term projects, but everything that gets funded through the state DOT, the Department of Transportation, has to begin with one of these plans, something being identified at the local level. So if it's not in the plan, it's much harder to get funded and adopted through that state transportation budget and implementation plan. So we really want to make sure that all of the deficient transportation areas and intersections, corridors, trails, bike facilities, sidewalks, all modes, transit. We want to make sure we get anything that's deficient and that could be deficient into this plan, so that could one day be funded and implemented through DOT. So here's a brief snapshot of where we're at for the overall project schedule. As I mentioned, we got kicked off last spring. We held the first public meeting at the end of the summer. And the goal of that meeting was to essentially get input on what's the underlying conditions out there today. From an automobile congestion standpoint, traffic safety, multimodal connections, transit service. Really want to get a picture back when we last talked of what's not working today, where are the issues across the MPO, which is 4-county area. And we got feedback from you all. There was a survey, an online comment map. We held the public meeting, and actually in a series of sessions, to be able to get that feedback. And I will quickly go through and recap what we heard. We had about 40 people in attendance of the virtual sessions, but many, many more were on the project listserv, the email lists, and were able to contribute to our underlying list of projects. So as far as what was identified through that first round of public engagement, we identified those corridors, those roadways, and those streets within the MPO that were the most congested and most in need of safety improvements. And you'll see a lot of overlap here. You know, if a corridor is having issues with safety, it tends to have issues with congestion. And you know, if it's safety with one mode, then there tends to be a correlation where you have safety issues with multiple of those active transportation modes. So one of the most congested roads we heard from you all was roads like Skybow Road, Cliffdale, Rayford Road, Ramsey Street. Same thing with safety, in need of those improvements, looking at things like crash data, Ramsey Street, Rayford Road, and Skybow Road. So you'll see a lot of repeat contenders here. As far as pedestrian and bicycle access, we were able to identify those from public feedback and then a series of existing conditions analysis. Also looking at things like crash data, existing facilities, new trail connections, new major traffic generators. Same thing with public transportation. We identified a few roadways for increased improvements as well. So overall, there were really a variety of other comments, looking at things like improving at-grade rail crossings, providing more connectivity between neighborhoods, because there are a lot of cul-de-sacs in the MPO where you may not have, you know, a way to get from one neighborhood to the next without kind of going in a long out-of-direction path. Looking at more bus stops, some improved safety treatments. So that was really useful feedback going into the project, making sure that we had a good baseline of what's out there today and where the issues are. Since that public meeting we held in September, that round of public engagement, the Kittleson team here has gone through and updated basically all of our existing conditions to go out to a design year. And for this case, we're looking at a project build year for 2050. And not all projects are going to take that long to get implemented and funded, but that's the horizon year that we're working with for this study. We also performed a transit needs analysis, looking at not only where the existing service is, but also where's the best place to expand service, not only geographically, but also in terms of frequency and amenities. And then we developed a draft list of projects for improvement. We ended up clustering a lot of those locations with issues into identifiable projects for inclusion in the plan, and then worked through a toolbox of transportation improvements, looking at things like how to address congestion, safety, multimodal access. And really those last two bullet points are where we're looking for, again, we're really looking for your feedback before we finalize recommendations. In terms of a future traffic assessment, we did a level of service analysis, looking at major intersections across the MPO. You'll see a lot of these maps have a lot of very detailed data in them, and they're presented in pairs. One is zoomed in to the city of Fayetteville to show some detail. The next map is zoomed out a bit to show the entire MPO area. The purpose of this assessment is really just update from where we are today to 2050. And looking at growth and traffic volume and those conditions, you know, what may be working today, but is projected to fail in the future. You can see there's a variety of intersections along some of those major corridors. Looking at things like the letter grade, level of service D or better is generally working well. That's typically the standard out there, whereas a level of service E would be kind of right at the capacity of the road, and level of service F would be failing. So that's what we use to really update that analysis and project that into the future. Another major assessment that we did within the plan is to do what's called a transit needs or transit propensity assessment. And you'll see a map here that shows areas in red and yellow and orange are really those areas that have, that we see a higher demand for transit service, whether it's population density, demographics, looking at things like zero car households, Also major generators for transit service, such as hospitals, schools, major employers, parks, recreation, those types of things. And really what we found is, you can see there's the city of Fayetteville, which is served by FAST and already has a pretty extensive transit network, but also looking at how do you expand that within the city, and then also to some of the neighboring communities like Spring Lake, Rayford, Hope Mills. And we'll get into that later in the presentation, but just wanted to review the additional analysis that was done since the last time we talked. Now, getting into the project recommendations, we really used a three-stage process to start with identifying, okay, where are all those deficiencies out there within the MPO? And there's a really long list. Once you start looking at all the places with high crashes, high crash frequency, all of the different corridors that may have some congestion issues, all the different needs when it comes to transit service, at-grade rail crossings, and bicycle and pedestrian safety and access, you end up with hundreds of possible locations. What we did was we did a tiered ranking of those different locations and looked at a variety of performance measures to get to a manageable list. And that's kind of what we'll show you here today is about the top 20 or so for each one of these bullet points that you see here, the top 20 locations for improvement. Then we identified what's called a toolbox of different treatments to provide to address each of those deficiencies. And that's where we're looking for your input before we get into project recommendations. So to recap that, we had, again, three different stages. We divided all of the different types of projects out there so that we've got, we don't want to have an unfair kind of apples to apples comparison. So we kind of took everything and divided into your traditional traffic safety and congestion projects and used the three-stage process that you see here to get to those recommendations. You can see here listed in this matrix is all the different metrics that we used to go in detail and rank these locations before we got into recommendations. Same thing goes for pedestrian and bicyclist safety and access, but obviously you're going to use different measures for those than you would for a traditional corridor improvement, corridor safety and congestion improvement. Same thing goes for transit service and at-grade rail crossings. Those were also considered different types of projects. So we used a different methodology, but still stayed within that three-stage process. We also, for all of these project types, we wanted to consider really areas that have been historically and even recently underserved, looking at places without healthcare, without access to grocery stores, convenience stores. And so that was kind of an additional performance measure used to help rank these improvements in addition to everything else you see here. So again, you'll see a lot of details with these. I'm not going to be able to really walk you through every single location. That's where I'm pointing. I'm going to point to the project website. There's an online comment map there that you can go and see interactively what all these locations are and be able to comment and review those. So I'll hit the high points here, and we'll have a chance to take questions at the end. But hopefully this kind of gives you a sense of what the team has been doing and what the plan will eventually look like. So as far as traffic safety and congestion goes, we looked at things like high crash locations, and I showed the city here, but we looked at the whole MPO. Same thing goes for those level of service E or F spots along major corridors. We looked at things like corridor level travel time and delay, so that additional time you spend within the hour, within the peak rush hour, traveling along those corridors. We also looked at something called reliability, which is kind of day-to-day fluctuation. So you may have a crash one day and it takes 10, 20 minutes longer, to get to your destination versus a typical day. So all those things went into kind of our final list of projects for improvement. You can see them highlighted here. You have the same corridors that you all provided, earlier on. Just wanted to get a quick a quick confirmation here. Can you all see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good, thanks. Had a question about that pop up. Going back to traffic safety and congestion, you see Skybo Road, Ramsey Street, Hope Mills Road, Main Street through Hope Mills, Owen Drive, Cliffdale Road, getting into the downtown part of Fayetteville and the Person Street. Looking farther out, you've got a corridor, Highway 87 in Spring Lake, and even going out Rayford Road towards Rayford, Fayetteville Road, and then the larger sections of Ramsey Street. So hopefully pretty typical here for what's maybe expected, but again, we're starting with a really big list of deficiencies and trying to get to what's really that top 20 that we want to prioritize for improvement. That gets us into our toolbox, and I'll go through each project type here before I talk about the different types of recommendations, but we'll be reaching back out to you all later on this week. There'll be a survey posted to really get your opinions and your thoughts on these types of improvements. But for each set of recommendations, we've got a toolbox of 5 or 6 different treatments to then go in and say, okay, for Skybo Road, we're going to recommend X, Y, and Z from our toolbox. And it could be 2 or 3 different things. But looking at things like medians and access management to improve safety, but also to improve congestion. Looking at increased connectivity. So I've shown here, where you kind of take 2 cul-de-sacs and join them, creating that neighborhood connectivity. Looking at roundabouts and other intersection treatments that may be alternative to what's out there today. You've got the traditional widening and turn lanes. You got things like traffic signal retiming. These are big things. There's definitely smaller scale treatments that can be used, extending left turn lanes, using travel demand management. But really our goal before the plan wraps up later this summer is to take each of these treatments in the toolbox and apply them to each corridor, and considering that our recommendations. Getting into pedestrian and cyclist safety and access, we looked at things like crash data, and that's all. There's maps available to the public on NCDOT's website that can show you all of that. We've also posted them up in project maps. So looking at where those are most predominant. Looking at sidewalk coverage and something called bicycle level of traffic stress, which is really what proportion of the cycling population would feel comfortable cycling on these corridors. And as you can see, for most of them, it's pretty low. So looking at ways to create a lower stress network. Getting into looking at crosswalks. And here's an example of an intersection that doesn't have any marked crosswalks, but does have sidewalks everywhere. So even looking at the intersection level and saying, well, here's a major barrier to pedestrian access due to lack of marked crosswalks. So all of that goes into our top 20 or so needs, and it follows similarly to the traffic safety and congestion. And a lot of the corridors are the same, but some are different. Looking at corridors like Murchison Road, Morganton Road, you can see Eastern Boulevard. These are the ones that scored highest for us, but we also want to hear your feedback. If something is missing from this list that you really feel like should have scored higher, that's one of the things we're trying to get. You'll see schools marked up on here. We had a general comment to increase crosswalks, marked crosswalks and pedestrian safety sidewalks near schools. And that doesn't mean that it's going to solve 100% of the problems. You're still going to have crossing guards and there's things like safe routes to schools. Those types of things go into all of that, but just kind of had a general comment to improve pedestrian safety and access near schools.
Zach.
Yes.
There's some questions in the chat regarding the time periods or how far back some of the crash data that you guys incorporated into the plan, how far back that data went, that sort of thing.
Yeah, great question. I'll throw the crash data up here again, and please do keep the chats coming. I'm trying to monitor that as well, but we can certainly cover those If we don't, we can cover them at the end. The pedestrian and bicycle crash data that you see here was about, I believe, a 10-year period, going back from 2011 or 2010 to 2019. So it's not completely current, but it was a 10-year span. The other crash data that we used was the latest 5 years of data. And that is, I did see a question about data and the sources for data. We will provide all of that in the final project report. So thank you for the questions. Again, the pedestrian safety needs, even going out to some of the suburbs and the rural areas of town, looking at which corridors score the highest for increased sidewalks, increased crosswalks. You can see that here. For bicyclist safety, we again went through a list of the top 20 locations and also had some trails to incorporate, like the Cape Fear River Trail extension, looking at a few new corridors, with really the goal of providing connectivity in addition to safety. So it's a little bit different here, where we look at where's going to be a more popular or more comfortable route for cyclists to take, as opposed to some of the major corridors. So again, going into the MPO wide, looking at corridors like Southern Avenue, Eastern Boulevard, to really get the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak, when it comes to providing that additional cyclist connectivity. And here's the tools in our toolbox. Unfortunately, there's a lot of those. Looking at things like complete streets, so narrowing the roadway configuration and providing bike lanes, providing those median island refuges. There's separated bike lanes, separated multi-use paths. So there's a lot of different treatments out there, and the project team here is going to be matching each to the most appropriate corridor when it comes to things like feasibility, right-of-way availability, opportunities to reduce numbers of lanes, even for a couple of these corridors, and prioritize activities. So the next one up on the list here is transit service. And again, we looked at things like transit propensity, and you can see up on the right-hand corner, that's the existing transit routes within FAST, so the Fayetteville transit service network. Looking at what areas currently don't have transit service that might have a higher propensity, as well as which routes could use additional service and amenities. And we found that obviously extension out to Spring Lake, Rayford, Hope Mills, those make the top of the list. But also looking at additional service and expansion into corridors like Rayford Road, Fayetteville Road, Ramsey Street, and then adding service to Cliffdale Road and Bingham Drive. Not as many tools, although obviously a lot of effort and a lot of opportunities here. The distinguishing types of tools in our toolbox here are extending and increasing service, providing additional amenities, and that includes crosswalks. So the bus stop is connected often to a signalized or unsignalized crosswalk like you see here, and making sure that those amenities are there as well is something that we would be prioritizing. The final type of project that we analyzed here is the at-grade rail crossings, and there are a lot of them around the MPO. There are a lot of them that are routinely blocked by different forms of rail, whether it's passenger or freight service. So we took a deep dive into every single at-grade rail crossing within the MPO to look at, okay, what's the frequency of the rail? How long is the train? When does the train come through, whether it's in the middle of the night or during potentially closer to peak hours of travel. And we identified which ones are really ranked the highest in terms of at looking to address the issues, whether it's a grade separation or something else. So the ones we found here and shown on the map are the CSX line over Country Club Road, over Eastern Boulevard, and then the shorter lines over Skybar Road, Lunsford Drive, and McPherson Church. So those are just a few. There's obviously many more within the MPO, but these are the ones that ranked the highest. And talking about different things different strategies to use in the toolbox. There's the grade separation, whether you bridge the rail over the street like you see here, or underneath. I did see Hay Street in the questions. That's definitely one that we looked at. Things become pretty constrained once you get into the downtown area, so we did look at things like feasibility when ranking the top. Yeah, that was certainly a corridor that we looked at. Looking at improving the at-grade crossings in areas where it may not be feasible to bridge the rail over or the street over. And then there's some more, I would say, impactful and maybe extreme tools like closing crossings and relocating rail. That is not something that we got into in terms of mapping out these locations, but it's definitely something that we can explore and that we're going to explore in the final plan and offer that up as a solution. So with that said, I'll go into the final map, and you see on this map, every single type of project is included. The other maps that I showed have each project type broken out separately to make it a little bit easier to follow along. I'll add that every map is available up on the website, and there's also the interactive comment map, the interactive map where you can click the different types of improvements to kind of help explore through these. You see, we have pretty broad coverage across the MPO, and I'll also note that there are several corridors that they do have they have project types in multiple areas. So we could be recommending an improvement that addresses multiple needs, such as multimodal safety and traffic congestion. There are definitely tools in the toolbox that do all of the above. So I will move on and talk next steps. And this is where, again, we're looking for input from you all. Please go to the project website. It's congestionplan.com, so really easy to remember. There's a link. If you go to, and I'll bring it up here in a second, if you go to the virtual public meeting #2 link on there, all of the information that is shared here will be displayed there. We'll post the recording of the presentation, as well as the maps are up there already. We'll be providing a survey for the public to get your input on these different tools, and really looking for your additional comments and questions on those. And once we get all of that, kind of working over the next month or so to compile that, we'll then refine the project recommendations. We're going to be preparing a cut sheet for each corridor to really provide a profile and list of those projects. Then that is going to go into the plan. It's going to go back to the MPO to put into their final list of projects for scoring and implementation through NCDOT funding. And then that leads into the next round of statewide prioritization and then the eventual funding of those projects. Our draft report is going to be completed in June, and that will also be posted up on the MPO's website and on the project website for as long as it's active, but then eventually to the MPO's website. So with that said, welcome folks' questions and discussion. We're recording the meeting, so just want folks to be aware. We'll also record the chat for folks that want to get their comments out there. But again, appreciate everybody's participation and their time here. And with that said, we will stick around until 7 o'clock here to take your questions. Thank you.